Yes, so welcome everyone to this street talk. And today we have Nanna Verhoeff, a professor of screen culture and society at the Department of Media and Culture Studies at Utrecht, giving the talk. So Nanna, are you ready to share your screen?
Yeah, I am. But yeah, let me just first say that I'm delighted to be here, and I love the fact that you're an initiative that I understand that started during the pandemic, finding each other online, and we learned clearly that we could connect very easily internationally. So maybe we're all traveling a little bit less, which is for other reasons maybe also a good thing. But actually, the situation of the pandemic really inspired also parts of my book. So I'll be referring to that in a bit. I'm going to share my screen, which generally I don't like so much because I will be seeing the slides and less of you. But if at any moment you have a question or you want to raise something during my talk, which is, as I understood, meant to be quite informal, please do so because I actually love that. And if Daniela, if you see anything in the chat or something and I don't spot it, just interrupt me or let me know because I'm happy to make little passages as I talk. So let me share my screen. And I'm not so good at Zoom, but I believe it's now, the slide is visible. Okay, so disclaimer, this talk is unashamedly referring to my own work, but also to collaborations that have inspired my work. So I really took the opportunity, since I don't have another book launch lined up, I took the opportunity to make this really about the book project that I'm, of course, happy to have finished, but it's also a book that was developed over the years. So I'll also say a little bit about sort of the archaeology behind the book when it's relevant. And I, in that sense, yeah, you see the next slide, right? Just to make sure that yeah, okay, good. One time I had a presentation and I was clicking through slides and apparently the slides were frozen for the others, but perfect. So I want to start with the book cover actually. So the book cover picture, beautiful picture taken by my daughter, which I'm happy to flaunt and she's embarrassed by, but yes. It's actually taken in my home city in Rotterdam. For those of you who know Rotterdam, it's in the called Museum Park of the city where there's a lot of museums and there's a new building which is yeah, like a sphere of sorts and with highly reflexive facade. And at nighttime, there are projections by a video artist, Pipiloterist. And what I like very much about the image, or what for me it suggests, is two things that are important to also point out. Is one is because it's in my hometown, but in that sense quite arbitrary. I want to use that, and I have used it in my introduction to also point out my own positionality as a researcher. So a lot of the examples, and I am in the book, so it's about urban screens in different forms and shapes and sizes, commercial, artistic, activist, really a wide range, which is actually very much the point of the book. But it's also examples that I came across in my scholarship, in my reading, and my activities around around my scholarship, as much as encountering examples on the streets and encountering them myself. And this is an important point to make because it's about screen culture, which is local as much as it is global. It's specific and situated, but my approach is also proposing as I will talk about more, a perspective, an analytical perspective and concepts to work with understanding or analyzing how these operate and make meaning and position us as spectators and what that means, with through concepts that ultimately are intended to also be able to transport and to bring to other examples. So there's a paradox at play. I'm writing about very specific individual objects or situations, but from a perspective that allows us to hopefully compare them and to transport them to other locations. But I do want to also, of course, point out how situation is also, of course, cultural and historical and geopolitically situated. Actually, I'm hoping that I can offer some tools to reflect on that. So this is an important disclaimer that is part of the argument. What I also liked about this building is its metaphorical or symbolic meaning, maybe, because of the facade that actually we're looking at this Pipiloterie's art installation through its reflection on the building, which highlights something that I also write about this idea of a sort of a performative architecture. The notion of architecture is, I'll return to that later, is an important one. I know Anastasia is also interested in what we could maybe call architectural humanities. And maybe we can even talk about that in the discussion, what that could mean. And also for us in this mixed group, interdisciplinary group that we represent. How this could offer a lens to look at also very different objects or times or phenomena. Yeah, so art spilling onto the street is also something that this image for me, yeah, symbolizes. And also how actually the book is very much about these concepts that help us to analyze a variety, I mentioned that, but also how art, activism, but also everyday practices come together. And this I find very relevant to point out. It's for the book relevant, but also, of course, for this moment, the street talks, talking about street culture, the level of the street. I'll say a bit more about what I at least understand as the specificity of the street. But it's precisely this mix of discourses, if you will, cultural discourses that yeah, connect, combine, have frictions, maybe sometimes conflicts between them. This artistic, activist, or critical, and the everyday notion of cultural practice on the street. Okay, so. But I also I love to just show pictures. I'd rather just show pictures and not talk. But I also wanted to bring in some examples of the things that we can maybe see today, and not just about the content and their activist messages per se, but also how a lot of the objects that I talk about are very much providing subtitles, if you will, maybe even literally so, to the things that are happening at our time in our streets. So the street actually is also a representing in some way or referring to a historical notion, and we can think, or a historical cultural moment, and we can think of this in a very mundane sense. We can look at advertisements that speak to us about our understanding of the world in through commercial messages, but also reflect these tropes and ways of thinking of our times. But of course, projection art like this, really hacking the urban facades for messages about the present, can be very powerful. And these are examples, of course, relating to the political situation in the United States, speaking to the urban public as a we, we will weather this storm, referring to this historical moment with the word is, of course, this, of course, stressing that punctum, that historical punctum. And also this blinking, I tried to insert a blinking GIF, but it didn't work out, so it's a fixed image. But this blinking eye projection that suggests, we are watching this historical moment. And then, of course, the we is also the public, the street itself, but it's actually looking at the street as well. So, yeah, some of the examples in the book are commercial or more mundane, but sometimes, but I also like to, or what is important in the book is also to provide these tools to think about these more activist moments, because they can tell us a little bit about how on the street, at the street level, the street level is also a canvas for messaging about urban culture. So these are some more examples of this this type of messaging, also using very different surfaces here on a car. There are some more examples on social media that you can see where cars are followed and having these projections that literally sort of override and subtitle the things that are happening at the moment, and that spark public debate and controversy, to put it mildly. Also, this kind of this meme culture, it's actually a form of meme culture that is taking place in projections very fleetingly. Of course, projections being in that sense not really immaterial, but you know what I mean when I say they're immaterial, they're fleeting and they're disappearing. They can be, because of that fact itself, they are can be quite powerful, but they also speak to a broader media culture, to the circulation of images, and to how the whole the societal structures are so impacted by media culture that actually these activist projections are inserting themselves into. So in that sense, the idea of the streets being a site for messaging, the street is already also part of this media city. And sometimes, and this is a quite local example, when I think it was already 2 years ago, during the New Year's, there were racist slurs projected on the Erasmus Bridge in Rotterdam. And what I'd like to point out with this slide is not just the fact that obviously political and socially critical messages can be of any kind. But that also they can speak, the responses can be also triggering responses. So there was a project in Rotterdam where people could submit positive messages to put on the bridge as to counter these racist slurs that were on the bridge earlier. And of course, it also, the example of this case, besides the content of the messages, it was also quite experienced as quite a shock in locally in the Rotterdam, the city of Rotterdam, but also I guess nationally in the Netherlands, because it was so public and so sudden, and really like people hadn't thought about that this kind of that it was perceived as an aggression in public space, and how people could do this without being seen. So the projection, of course, technologically, you could say, works by the necessity of distance. So light to be projected on something, the source of the light and the source of the image needs to be at a distance. And this literally made the people sending the messages invisible. So it's actually the controversy around what happened was very much, I find it interesting because it was also very much about the specificity of the medium, the technological material specificity of the medium of projection, of the cinematic, if you will. Very other, quite a different, again, a sort of a public street campaign that I wanted to say. I'm throwing some examples up front, and then I'll go to also more textual work, but we can have these images in our minds when I speak about the theories a little bit that I wrote about in the book. But another example of a sort of a street project is a campaign held in the city of Utrecht, where our university, Daniela's University, Anastasia's university, is located. And it was a campaign against street harassment. And what they did is they put up a screen resembling a generic street commercial structure for commercial messages. And what was seen is a mouth, a lipstick mouth, suggesting a female speaker voice, shouting out obscene messages to people passing by. Of course, there was also a camera, a webcam part of this installation, so it could be targeting or directing specific people at that moment present in the street. Yeah, I'll refer later to what I like in this case, but it's here again. It's not so much activist. It was organized by the municipality, but it is a screen used for a sort of socially relevant topic, inserting a sort of an intervention in a specific type of behavior in public space, but addressing this literally and figuratively on the street, in the very public space that it is part of. So you can imagine that street harassment exists by the virtue of the specificity of public space, with a relative anonymity of the person. Remember the racial slurs on the bridge? It's a little bit, it has its same, as I would talk about, dispositif, this kind of spatial, architectural, if you will, arrangement where people are positioned and situated when they are addressed, when they are called to their verantwoordelijkheid, accountability. Okay, so the word or the concept that I introduced in the book that I thought was relevant for this, and I'll look at the time, I'll speed up a little bit, for this meeting with you all, is the term hodos, that I thought would be helpful to think about the specificity of the street. Of course, we know the demos, the agora, all these Greek terms referring to aspects of sociality, of our cultural, social domain, the demos, etc. And the hodos, I think, is a good term to use for the street because it has this double meaning. It's not just the street as, the pavement on which we move, but it also, the word also refers to the root of methodos, which is the way in a more metaphorical sense, the route to something, a transformative idea of walking a path towards something. So, which is not the locus, but actually the method. This double entendre, this double meaning of the word hodos, as much as these other Greek terms that are referring to domains, but are actually very much referring to societal structures more than the literal material place that they are signaling. I think hodos can do the same thing for us, to talk about process, but also change, and how the street is a dynamic space that also signifies the historical perspective on culture as taking place, but also in development in multiple ways. So this, maybe we can keep a little bit on the background. This is a slide that I just, these are grabs from the images in the book as a way to sort of immediately show the range of images that the range of projects that I discuss. In my book, I do focus a lot on artistic or activist projects because of their singularity. While actually a lot of urban advertisements, especially with moving images, very often are also very creative in the use of their location in a specific way. So yes, there is, of course, also a political perspective that I have as an author, but at the same time, it's not just about their political or societal commentary, but it offers a way to really zoom in on how the very specific materiality and location specificity of these works are part of their design and part of the way that their messages are constructed. So they are very privileged sites, if you will, and highly effective to analyze, because they can really give us some insights in how they're designed and their material aspects can bring about situations, and this is this situational perspective that I work with in an urban context to position the spectator in specific ways, to convey messages in certain ways. And again, my intention is to offer concepts by analyzing distilled concepts that may be relevant also for other objects and also other moments in time. You can imagine this also feeding into a more historical understanding of a comparative perspective that I work with. And just to emphasize, for me, I've written some other stuff, but also these 3 monographs that for me have a special relationship. So I also put in the book that it's actually finishing off a trilogy with Amsterdam University Press of books that, in very different ways, but to me, very related ways, also talk about different screen cultures, from early cinema, when then cinema was really a very new and experimental medium, to the notion of mobility as a trope in visual culture, also through the times, where I kind of make a back and forth comparison to early cinema and that time when people experimented with the new technology of cinema, to reflect on their sense of nowness, their instant nostalgia, the idea of the present being able to be part of that visual culture, a fascination with technology, but immediately also connecting to perspectives on nature, on travel, on the diversity around the globe, the sort of spectacle of that turn of the century modernity. But also the book on mobile screens took that a bit into the comparison with other moments where mobility, the trope of mobility, was worked with explicitly in these new technologies, ranging from our new mobile phones or touch screen technology, also to urban screens, as being very much connected to this historical time where also technology was an object of fascination, but feeding into the tropes at that time. Of course, the Urban Screens book, it's not making it full circle, but it for me stands very much in relation to these other books that were also very much about concepts and perspectives, and also including this comparative perspective and again, with a historicizing the moments of change in our modern culture. I have to speed up, right? Because I do want to talk a bit more. So I'll just briefly point out. Yeah, I'm now going through some slides, but that's okay. If you just listen to me, it might make sense. I'm not rushing the talks in that sense, but I do have some slides about the notion of the interface that is very much also at the heart of where I see as an approach to screen culture, and which is very much relevant for looking and thinking about screen culture as part of a urban culture, of a situated culture that is on the street with its well, architectural workings, architectural cultural workings and messaging and meaning making, where the interface is actually one of those concepts very much appearing in the book as also part of the perspective, where we think about the specificity of technology and materiality to both, separate and connect to establish meaning, but also to sort of intervene into other structures. So that to sort of summarize the key building blocks of what I propose is to think about the urban situation, the urban as a specific dispositif. We can talk about that. Maybe I don't want to spend too much time at this moment, but an arrangement where subjectivity is constructed in relation to other elements in the city. It's an architectural perspective, if you will. The specificity of the mobile and also situated form of spectatorship. We can imagine being in the city on the street means that we are mobile. If we stand still, it's only temporarily so, and sometimes not even allowed for. Urban space, the street is very much also regulated our mobility, so it is mobile, but it's not wild. It's quite regulated, top down also in a way. But the spectatorship, the individual is very much in this on taking shape on the street. And if we think about the way that we encounter messages or messaging, we can think of this as through the notion of the interface, or rather the more gerund notion of the interface, interfacing as a process in which meaning making is constructed. It's emergent on these streets. Again, going back to this double entendre, or this double meaning of hodos, as not just a location, but as something, as a location where things can emerge. I'm getting tired of my own voice. So for the sake of time, maybe I just end it here.
Okay.
And we can because these are really the important for me important building blocks of the argument that I want to make in my book. I told Daniela and this is especially helpful now because I'm skipping the rest of the slides, to share the PDF if you're interested, also with a lot of links to materials. So you can look at that if you want. I just want to rush, if you're okay, to the very last slide, where I just want to round off, and I thought it was beautiful, so I want to share that. I think it's gorgeous. The sort of positioning of these images that I just thought about, this eye looking at the street and bearing witness, punctuating the historical moment on the street, and also the mouth really representing inserting messages and speaking back to urbanites on the street. And then, of course, the reflexive surface as showing us what we really are doing on these streets. I'll round it off here, and sorry for having prepared too much.
No
Let's
problem at
talk.
all. Thank you very much, Nanna. I thought it was very thought provocative. I've lots of notes. And what I found really interesting is how you positioned your last book, and then in relation to your previous work,
Mhm.
and placing it in the context of screen culture. And for me, the thing that was in my head as a historian, I guess, was constantly a graffiti, graffiti, graffiti. So not so much the screens, but rather the messaging and how that plays as a continuum in the street. So maybe we can talk about that. But first, let me open the floor for the other participants to ask questions. Yes, Anna.
Um, Hi, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I'm also gonna talk a little bit about the graffiti thing because to me also that kind of is it's very parallel, obviously with all the differences in technology, but it's again a way of situating an artistic practice, becoming part of the city. So I come from an architecture background, so that's very much graffiti because it's a little bit more, I guess, long term, if you like. It's something that often becomes a layer in a building, especially for buildings that have been abandoned or are, have exposed surfaces that make that easier. And um, every time I have been looking at that, I was always more interested of the person who consumes that art rather than the person who is intentionally painting on a wall or creating an installation like the ones you showed, because often the message is not clear. There are many cases where, you described and you gave a context for the eye, for example, but the eye can also mean very negative things of this is something that is looking upon us. And, there are ways of interpreting, I guess, these type of installations that can very much that's what makes them very interesting, by the way, that the fact that this is an ongoing discussion between the creator or ors and the people who live in that space and use that space. So I was wondering what's the graffiti link first, and also this idea of ambiguousness, I guess, of those kind of installations.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, two things. Uh, First speaks to that sort of to the status of those types of works as being an object of analysis. What I do also take some time in my book to develop is this building on Mika Ball's notion of the theoretical object, is to also talk about the status of the object as a way to develop your concepts that are actually proposed or suggested by the object rather than that the concepts are imposed, and then also fixating the object and its meaning. So what I would say, graffiti like this, and this is graffiti by light, is actually pointing at itself a lot in its unofficial status. It's sort of like an urban palimpsest rewriting and having as part of its message that sort of interventionist character. So making it either illegal or changing the meaning of something. And I just, if you indulge me, I just wanted to very quickly share a picture that really, I think, goes with that. Do you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an example of the power also of precisely that tool of reinscribing meaning, overlayering, changing the existing or pre-existing meaning, maybe in this case, of course, it's very much, it was at the time of the Black Lives Matter protests. It's also very telling that the messaging itself on the statue, changing its meaning, was so diverse. So it's combining Black Lives Matter with pride messaging, or even Corona-related messaging, wash your hands. So it's very much precisely because of that mix, saying a lot about what is going on at that moment, which was so much. So it's messaging about that multiplicity also. We see the messages, but we also see the sheer multiplicity of them. That gives an extra layer to their meaning. But this also speaks maybe to your point about, analyzing for the sake of reconstructing a meaning, because that's, I don't know if I misunderstand maybe your point, but like, what does it mean, and is this the intended meaning or not? So what we can hope to do is unfold what we as an analyst can see as contributing to a meaning, more than definitely finally stating what the meaning is. So in that sense, it's a theoretical object propelling us, or asking of us to think about how it constructs its meaning, rather than what that meaning finally and univocally would be. I don't know if this makes any sense, but and again, in my presentation now, also because I had to shrink it a little bit, sorry again about that. It's maybe very much using the projections as a case in point, because I wanted to also, and I didn't have time for that, to zoom in on one specific chapter that is very much about the notion of figuration, and how sort of these projected messages work specifically. But a lot of the other chapters are dealing with very different type of objects, like more interactive screens, or more commercial screens, much more recognizable as screens maybe. And it moves to these projections to think about screens in a more more overarching way, as being canvases for this temporary intervention into and marking the historicity of the moment. Sorry, again, a lot of words, but
I think that is very clear, and it's also good to hear about all these other aspects that are covered in the book. Kim.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the talk and the inspiring images, I think, for sure. Gives us a lot to think about. I also, I was wondering, because it's something that when I saw the topic of the talk came to my mind, but very much from a very different angle. But I was wondering if it's something that you've thought of, or that relates somehow to what you've done, which is actually the use of screens, of individual screens currently in streets. And the fact that they are, I think, frequently causing a distraction of engaging with the actual street, the physical street. But perhaps also not. Sometimes they are taking pictures of it. Sometimes they are providing a sort of different type of connection, perhaps. I don't know. But I see, only this morning I saw several people walking while looking at their screen, right? So it's really completely not in the space, not knowing where they're walking. So walking, like snaky, not realizing they're almost walking into a pole kind of thing. So I see that happening quite a bit, and I wonder. So that was one question, and another is perhaps more related to the graffiti question. But some of these screens, I feel, are in spaces that have the possibility to create such spaces. Do you have any thoughts on what about where they are and where they're not? Like, there are many spaces where they're such screens are not. Either not because the technology isn't present or isn't available, but also because perhaps the artists are not either allowed or capable of providing such images. I mean, these kinds of looking at the two, this is a place where this is done versus this is a place maybe where it's not appearing, and why. Those are two questions. Sorry.
Yeah. Great. I'm always so my middle book on mobile screens is very much about mobile spectatorship, and I in one of the chapters in this book, I do write about the mobile perspective and inserting it. Well, and I thought, should I do this, or is this returning too much to the mobile screen topic? But I think, yeah, it makes very much sense to also reflect on it in this constellation. So yes, I do write about the specificity of the mobile screen and the distracted gaze. It's a very specific type of, that's why a lot of the messaging is also very brief, and also very often or mostly without sound, for example, making it very different from cinematic projections. Yeah, I have a lot to say about that. But one of the concepts that I then for the chapter that is very much about that is crossing, as a way to talk about not just distraction and being in two realms, but actually where do these cross? Where do they connect? What is the moment where people go in and out of these bubbles or these spaces? So to think of crossing also not as an on and off, but also of a spectrum. I mean, what I then do is I use our thinking and the terminology that we use from augmented reality to virtual reality, but actually there are two types of technologies, but we're actually very much also interested in precisely their mixing or overflowing, that we tend to talk about as mixed reality of XR or XR. So I talk a little bit more about that X, the notion of the X, the cross. There is actually also, if we think about it in a hodological sense, I mean, think of also the street crossing. That's hence the image that I have of that intersection with the zebra. Do you call it a zebra in English? Yeah, the crossing that is literally a crossing of two zebras is where you can imagine that the one direction changes direction once crossed. So if you enter from the right, you end up at the left. So I talk a little bit about that, about how crossing domains and also spectatorship using in and out mobile devices is actually bringing about effects also in this other real domain. Well, anyway, a lot of blah, blah, sorry about that. What was the other question? That was also very important, I thought.
About where these things are and where they are not, so like where such projections are placed and where they are not.
Yeah. Well, maybe one of the things that I would add actually to your question is not just where they are and where they are not, but where they are, where they have not yet been. I mean, thinking of these projections on the statue is, of course, inserting imagery that was absent. It's actually claiming a presence that is very much at the heart of those projections, claiming messages and images where they were not. On the other end, not end of the spectrum, but something other is, of course, the more infrastructural screens, or the also always temporary. I mean, architecture is also temporary, right? If we zoom out historically, it's always temporary, but maybe shorter and longer term. But also facades or screens that are mounted on in certain places also create and are working by the virtue of the space around them. I mean, literally making it a situational medium. It's not the facade so much, but you need sightlines. There's a whole territory, a spectatorial territory that is created by this presence that maybe was not yet before. So a screen on a building creates sightlines, creates a space, if you will. So yes, your question is very right, where they are and where they are not, but it's actually also the question, where are they and what is their significance of their new presence? And also, what is it, how do they create space rather than take up space? Yeah, so adding more questions to your questions, that's my trick. Not to answer them, but adding questions.
Yes, thank you. I don't see a hand raised. Oh, yes, I do. Anastasia.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Because I can't hear me. You can?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Whenever I thank you, Nana, by the way, and happy birthday. Nana is my neighbor, so I relate to the whole like Rotterdam scene. It's exciting to see the photos. I recognize them. Whenever I think about screens in cities, and whenever I see them like at Times Square, I think of Blade Runner, the first Blade Runner, and how this projection of the future is just screens, and you see this like Japanese sort of geisha woman, and then it's Los Angeles. I just love that. And I liked what you said about situatedness. And I was thinking about how the screen examples that you showed, a lot of them were political, like the BLM or the bridge in Rotterdam, but also even COVID related, you know. So very endemic to the time and place of where the screens were generated. And I'm wondering, thinking about this like future projection of in Blade Runner of the city as always having massive, like being dominated by screens, to what extent are screens locked to location? Or have you in your research discovered universal kinds of screens that also exist and that transcend sort of the situatedness of where they exist?
Great question. I think what I try to offer is precisely to think about their situatedness, and I don't believe that we can that screens are never situated. So I don't think that their screens can exist and transcend the situatedness because of the fact that they exist by the virtue of its spectator. So if we think of the of a dispositif, and of course dispositif is an architectural concept in a way, right? I mean, if we go back to Foucault and think of the dispositif and explain it through that prison perspective of the panopticon as an emblematic dispositif. Of course, they're very different dispositif. We can think also in scaling, the urban dispositif, which has by the fact that it's an urban dispositif consists of many possible dispositifs within them. Indeed, the dispositif of the mobile spectator being on the street where also other screens are visible. I mean, you could go as far as to say that the screen doesn't exist outside of its relation with the beholder. And of course, it's a bit of a Baradian new materialist perspective that both are emergent within their intra-relating. But of course, we're experimenting like crazy. You know, it's a very modern thing, at least since 2 centuries, but actually maybe it's you know, Plato's cave, etc. So So now we are making the sky a screen, right? We did it already centuries ago with fireworks, but with the drones and you know, so trying to transcend the materiality of the surface. We've been doing that, and also with thinking of holograms and smoke projections. And in that sense, I like to also blow up the notion of the screen. And also this is what I suggested in this abstract also, that we can think of all kinds of material, performative materialities that create meaning, and look at them as architectures or look at them as screens. So the screen becomes a concept. Sorry to again even go further in questioning rather than answering. So I think it's a beautiful thought experiment to think of how do screens or screen-like phenomena try to transcend their own materiality. That's what I hear in your question.
But
That
I love that you said a screen. I'm almost hearing you say it doesn't exist without a spectator.
Mhm.
That's just brilliant. So yeah, it's always situated then. Yes.
Yeah, and imagine, literally, this experience that we have when in a movie theater, when the movie hasn't started. The screen is a surface, and once the projection starts, the screen also dematerializes as a surface because of the light. So it's then, but the light actually needs the surface in order to be seen. So if we look at the light projection, we don't see anything. Others will see the images projected on our faces. So we need this material to be there and not in order to make sense of the image. And this, of course, is just, you know, the specificity of projection technology. But you can take it conceptually as well. That's
With-
a closing sentence. No,
Yeah,
okay.
no. We have a few more minutes. One of the things that strikes me also in relation to earlier street talks, and especially also the work of Vikas Mehta, who has been a firm sort of attender of our talks. He when you talked about claiming the streets, I was also thinking about his work, and especially his emphasis also on commercial claiming of contemporary streets by businesses, etc. The fact that you have to pay basically everywhere to sit down for coffee or whatever. So I would be quite interested also to know how these commercial screens, how you look at that in terms of claiming the space, because that's a different thing, I would say, possibly than the political ones. But I see Luca has also raised his hand, so I'll give the floor to him first.
Well, in a way, it's your same question or related. So maybe I can add that up. And indeed, you show. I mean, first of all, thanks a lot. It really makes me so much more aware of what you said. The street as a carrier of messages of all sorts. So thanks. But indeed, you showed us, especially, let's say, activist of artistic screen. So in a way, that have a sort of activating effect, of at least that's a possibility, even emancipatory in a way. You can, of course, think at screen, I mean, the commercial one, or from a very oppressive states that are opposite effect, numbing, of enslaving. So then the question is it just about the different message, or also the medium could have some of these opposite characteristics?
I don't know if this is exactly what you mean, but what I do find interesting, because of course these forwarding or putting center stage these activist works or artistic works, as I call them, privileged sites, they're also shortcuts to talk about the specificity of how material design shapes spectatorial positioning, so creates dispositives. And it's we can also use other examples. And in a way, it's a shortcut because these works very often also refer to these traditional ways. They're sort of reminding us of what we're used to, but then doing it differently. So it is a shortcut to talk about both, if you will. Again, I take the possibility of showing another that compilation that I just some grabs of images. I mean, all the way in the left, in the bottom, we see a commercial use of a. It's actually one of the things that this other project referred to. Remember the street harassment? It's actually referring to this type of uses of traditionally commercial pillars in the street with commercial messaging. There, it's with a campaign reminding us of the usual use of these screen spaces for commercial messaging. And here, this one is sort of playfully adding the possibility to, with a webcam, to create a playful. So very often also play is inserted in these more experimental ways of using the screen technology, and this is used by commercial as well as artistic, as activist, or in educational purposes. So what I like to do then is to look at how this dispositif is creating, enabling types of messages that is not exclusive to that dispositif, but the characteristics of the dispositif can be used for. So this means that a specific architectural shape or screen does not dictate its message, but it is part of the way that the message is conveyed. Yeah, I think that it's like a little bit like the structure of a building does not dictate its use, but its use is depending on the way that the building is designed. I think that's a little bit the logic. Yeah. Just the all the way on the right. This is also a combination of very practical use of screen technology. In this case, projection of with a laser beam on the floor was during the pandemic. But it is an artwork. It's created by artists, but they actually designed it to be used in a very practical way in public space, so that you remember when, you know, the circles of being that we needed to be in at a distance. In order to be able to be co-present, we needed to keep distance. So this paradox was inspiring for the artists that make this projection. That is, yeah, it's, I don't know how it's not, it is a bit artistic, it's creative. So in that sense, I also talk about creative, the idea of the creation and creativity as being used for multiple goals, for educational purposes, for commercial purposes, for art, for activism. But what is that creative heart of the project that works with the affordances of the material, of the design, etc.? So sorry, I'll stop talking, but I hope it was in any way a response. It was intended as a response to your question.
Thank you, Nanna. I'm afraid we've already sort of made it past 2 o'clock. So, but I think it shows how wonderful and provocative the book is and the work that you've been doing. For those of you who are not aware, the book is also available, I think, freely to download. Huh?
Yeah,
on
I
the
put the
website.
link also in that.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Share those. Well, thank you all for being here. We are currently planning our final talk, I think, before the summer if we can, and otherwise we'll reconvene straight after the summer, but I hope we'll be able to come together one more time. For those of you who are interested in joining the platform, becoming an actual member, please let us know by email, either to us individually or via the claimingthestreets@gmail.com. And I look forward to seeing you soon-ish again. Thank you.
Wonderful. It was lovely. Thank you so much for hosting me. And I
Thank
want
you.
to be on the mailing list. Can you put me on the mailing list?
Absolutely.
Thank you.